and opportunities. This plenary will be led by our President, His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, and delegates are invited to deliver interventions on the global state of biodiversity, highlighting key achievements, challenges, and opportunities. They may reflect on the unique strengths of diverse nations and institutions and how they can be harnessed to advance conservation goals, particularly through synergies and partnerships. In your programs, there is the list of speakers, and those speakers, when your name is indicated, I ask you most humbly to come to this podium to deliver your remarks. Now, can I please hand over to His Excellency the President? Thank you.
Vanessa, thank you. I just want to make some very pleasing announcements. You will see the list of founding members, which include states, development banks, private sector, indigenous groups, research organization, and academia. I'm very pleased to say that we have 3 additional members of the founding group, Slovenia, Ecuador, and CAF. So we can please give them a big round of applause. I also want to acknowledge James Cooper from Slovenia. Is James around? Yes, you can stand because you deserve a standing ovation, and Slovenia deserve a standing ovation. And why? I'm very happy we have a very compliant group here. I didn't tell you why, and you already give him the round of applause. But Slovenia, who are walking the walk on private finance and have raised $500 million for investment in biodiversity. So congratulations, and we are already seeing the work. So we will go straight into this session, and we have some very distinguished leaders and organizations who have all made their remarkable mark on the global stage in relation to climate change, climate justice, climate financing, biodiversity, and basically the sustenance and survival of our very planet. We'll begin today by welcoming to the podium His Excellency, President of the Dominican Republic, Luis Abinader. Please. My friend and brother.
Thank you, my friend and dear brother, His Excellency Mohamed Irfan Ali, His Excellency Mark Phillips, Prime Minister of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, my dear friend Honorable Maya Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, my friend Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Her Excellency Maria Jose Pinto, Vice President of the Republic of Ecuador, His Excellency Iván Duque Marquez, former President of the Republic of Colombia, members of the Diplomatic Corps, participants in this Global Alliance Summit. Distinguished delegations, ladies and gentlemen, it is with profound appreciation that we acknowledge the government and the people of Guyana for their hospitality and for hosting this landmark summit. We are gathered here today united by a shared imperative: the preservation of biodiversity, the irreplaceable foundation upon which the vitality and continuity of our life and our planet depends. Today, that is our common cause. As a developing island state, we know closely the fragility of ecosystems. Therefore, in the Dominican Republic, we have assumed the commitment of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and we have integrated it into our national strategy for conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, supported by an action plan for 2025 to 2035. We are moving forward with concrete actions. We have strengthened our national system of protected areas, and by 2030 we will reach the global goal of 30% of terrestrial and marine protection. We have already declared the Orlando Jorge Mera Marine Sanctuary and expanded the marine mammals sanctuaries of Bancos de la Plata and La Navidad. These actions are not just environmental achievement, they are an act of intergenerational justice. At the same time, we promote the restorations of watersheds, mangrove, wetlands, and coral reef, promoting local bioeconomies and recognizing the real value of our natural capital. We do all this with a human-centered approach, placing the most vulnerable communities at the center and betting on inclusive development. However, the challenges persist. Sargassum. Sargassum is a serious threat. It affects marine life, coastal health, tourism, and artisanal fishing. That is why we propose that this crisis be recognized as a priority at the regional level, and we invite the Alliance to promote joint actions by mobilizing scientific, technical, and financial cooperation to turn this challenge into a sustainable opportunity. This global alliance for biodiversity, must transcend the Declaration of Principles. We need a driving force of real, measurable, and robustly financed solutions that ensure equity for the countries of the Global South, and in particular, for the small island developing states. Colleagues, biodiversity is not a luxury. It's not an abstract concept. It is the foundation of our food security, our health, and the economic well-being of all of our people. Defending it is an ethical imperative and a condition for peace and prosperity. May this summit mark the beginning of a global movement that combines vision and action with clear goals, progress indicators, and effective accountability mechanisms. Let's work together. Only through unity can we secure a future where life and all its richness and diversity flourish for the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Abinader, and we congratulate you also for your commitment and great work. Just to let you know that Guyana has also agreed that we're going to host the Secretariat here. We're going to put the resources in establishing the Secretariat here to follow up the work of this Alliance and Conference. I now have the honor of inviting the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to address us.
Mr. President, colleagues, I am very pleased to be here, and of course, not only because of this conference, but I want to be here in solidarity with my brother Afan. One of the good things about speaking after Louis is that I can say, I agree with everything you have said, and I adopt all that you have said as my own. Thank you very much. Which is true, that I accept everything which you have said as my own. Of course, I just couldn't come to Guyana and not say anything, so I have to say a few things. I want to affirm up front that one of the major outcomes of this particular gathering. That is to say, the founding of the Global Biodiversity Alliance, something which I urge that we all support. Certainly St. Vincent and Grenadines, we have shared experiences, but shared experiences must be made into shared expressions. And we can only have shared expressions if we build appropriate institutions. So this institution is critical. I want to speak very briefly, and I think my dear sister Mia would speak to the issues too. You know, the International Court of Justice delivered its advisory opinion today. If you turn on your phones, you're going to find the main results. And there's some really significant takeaways. As you know, the advisory opinion on climate change is brought by the small island developing states, and the Caribbean and the Pacific. Small islands are very instrumental, and Barbados played an important role. Antigua and Barbuda, they were supporting roles by St. Vincent and Grenadines and other countries, and of course our brothers and sisters in the Pacific. And often you would love it. AI already has a lot of details, but this has come from somebody who's on the ground at the ICJ who is dealing with this matter. First, climate change treaties are not lex specialis and do not displace other sources of international law. The court confirmed that the three climate change treaties, UNFCCC, Paris Agreement, and Kyoto Protocol, were not lex specialis. While they govern climate change obligations, they do so in tandem with other obligations of international law, such as customary international law obligation to prevent significant harm to the environment. That's a major pronouncement. The second one, the climate change treaties impose significant obligations on states, both of conduct and of result. In other words, emitting states cannot use the climate change treaties as an excuse to avoid substantive obligations. You know, the major emitters were arguing that these treaties were procedural. They say, the court says, no, they're not just procedural. Substantive obligations have been created. And very interesting, among the notable specific obligations, the court found that A, developed states had to provide funds for adaptation measures under the UNFCCC. B, Kyoto Protocol primary target is 1.5 degrees Celsius, not 2 degrees. C, the Paris Agreement, nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, have to be calculated based on the highest possible ambition and have to be implemented to the standard of stringent due diligence. And D, states must undertake financial assistance, technology transfers, and capacity building to assist other states. Third, customary international law also imposes an obligation on states to prevent significant harm to the climate system. And here I'm sure we'll elaborate on those also. The fourth one is important for island states, well, for everybody, where we are suffering significant sea erosion. That sea level rise does not extinguish statehood or reduce maritime territory. States are not under an obligation to update baselines on charts based on sea level rise, which means they do not lose maritime territory at sea level rise. So you may lose a piece of your land often. 5, the right to a clean and healthy environment emerges from other human rights law. Those are spelled out. all aspects of the existing law, that's number 6, all aspects of the existing law of attribution and causation and state responsibility generally pertain to climate change law, including the obligation of compensation for harm. This advisory opinion at first blush is going to help to transform the debate, create legal obligations where hitherto the emitters were thinking that they can just write things down and fob you off, as they try to do, as they've done us from Copenhagen always and all after. Number 7 is a very important one, and the lawyers would understand this. The obligations in respect of climate change are erga omnes partes. There's the Latin meaning that any state can enforce them against any other state. Very important. And 8, although the court will not determine specific liability in this advisory opinion, and nobody expected them to do that, the court seemed at the end to invite states to bring contentious disputes for climate change harm and reparation where there was sufficient evidence to satisfy the causal link between the respondents, that is the emitters' acts and omissions, and climate change harm. This is landmark. And you know, when this was being brought, the persons were telling us from the developed countries that we're on a wild goose chase. Well, just all this, they're telling us we're on a wild goose chase for reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies. Now, we must remember, however, there are some countries which have not subscribed to the jurisdiction of the ICJ. For instance, the United States of America. There are others too. I have a neighbor, a good friend, they have not subscribed. And though I'm sure they'll embrace this. But the world, if you're a big power, and you claim that you are interested in building international law, and just don't want to engage yourself in old-fashioned imperialism or modern-day hegemony, you have to agree on international law, even though you don't explicitly agree on the jurisdiction of the ICJ, because these propositions are sensible and reasonable propositions. And I always remind everybody that we are 8 billion people today in the world. A section of the world which may not be so enthused about this is 350 million. And there'll be others too. But more people in the world will agree with this, by far, most people. And this is an important staging post in the struggle. And you know, they say often that the Lord works in mysterious ways. His wonders to perform. On the opening day of your conference is the same day, coincidentally, that this fantastic advisory opinion has been delivered. So I think they're good omens. In this period of time, going all down to the end of the year, is a time I hope to be of continued good omens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, for bringing us up to date with some of the latest news there out of the ICJ. It is now my great honor of welcoming a continuous and consistent voice on climate and environment, the Honorable Mia Mottley, Prime Minister of Barbados.
Thank you very much, my dear brother, Mr. President, President of the Dominican Republic, my dear brother Luis, my longtime political mentor, the Honorable Ralph. I should call him the Great Ralph since he insists on calling everyone else the Great. Ralph the Great. And and how old I am. I have had, only this morning we reflected that I had the honor of giving the inaugural address at the Unity Labour Party in St. Vincent when it was formed. So 1994, so that tells you how long, 31 years ago. But Mr. President, I want to thank you and the people of Guyana for the boldness that you have exhibited here today. Nothing happens by accident. And if you are a person of faith, you will also believe even more that we are exactly where we are intended to be today at this point in time. That the International Court of Justice could just have delivered this morning, only weeks after the groundbreaking opinion of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights as well on climate, tells us that we are in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And I say so conscious that much of what we have been fighting for through advocacy has now received through these two opinions the legitimacy of the law. And while, as Ralph correctly pointed out, not every state in the world subscribes to the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, beyond its legal obligations that it establishes through this advisory opinion, it sends the signal of what is morally right for the world to do in terms of the settlement of policy. And I start here because for us, this has never been an issue. This is our lived reality. And for anyone who wants to know what it is like to have post-traumatic stress disorder, try living in the Caribbean or the Pacific, where for 6 months of the year, you literally go to sleep every night wondering whether a freak storm will happen, as happened to Barbados in 2021, or whether, and it led to the loss of just over 1,000 houses being damaged or lost, or whether you will face a rapidly developing hurricane, as happened 1 year ago in Hurricane Beryl, and where the people of the Grenadines, literally on the front line, bore the risk of life being threatened, and of course we know property being decimated. But in my own country, I describe it as the body blows, because while we did not have the loss of life, we had an attack on our coastal environment that decimated our fishing industry and that literally negatively impacted on most of our coastal infrastructure, public and privately owned, and by extension, our tourism sector, which is the leading earner for our economy. I start here because while that is not specifically on the issue of biodiversity, it's handmaiden. You cannot address the issues of saving the planet without addressing the issues of both climate and biodiversity and pollution all at the same time. And to that extent, those of us, therefore, who live this reality in the region have come to understand that while we will argue strongly internationally, we must act even stronger locally. Today is an example of such local action. As we speak, my Minister of the Environment is in fact at a conference on wetlands as we speak today, because in our own country, we just, with the help of the Barbados Wetlands Trust, resuscitated and reopened the Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary, which has been closed for almost 20 years, and which, with the assistance of funding from the government of Barbados, has now been reopened to the benefit not just of the people of Barbados and those who visit, but of course for the birds and all other forms of life that occupy those wetlands. And my friends, we have done this. I did it rather, because we're now out of it, but we did this while being in an IMF program. And I say this because choices matter, and choices are reflective of who we are and what we stand for as a people. In addition to the work of the Barbados Wetlands Trust at Graham Hall Nature Sanctuary, we are also seeking to bring back in the remaining wetlands, many of which have been destroyed, but the remaining wetlands for preservation as we go forward. We are also in the process of creating 2 other entities that are intended to be able to preserve our biodiversity ultimately. The Barbados Oceans and Coastal Authority will be established by an act of Parliament within the next few months, the draft bill having been completed and now being presented to Cabinet. And this will allow us to elevate the work that we must do to preserve our coastal areas, one, from the erosion of sargassum, which is deadly on our eastern coast, but 2, also from the natural erosion that is taking place as a result of agricultural runoff and other factors, and which, quite frankly, threaten what is our greatest concern, the stability of our water supply. Because if our aquifers are in fact polluted by salt water, then we will no longer be able to use those aquifers for the provision of drinking water for our people. So that coastal erosion has multiple negative consequences if we do not get on top of it. And therefore, we have determined that in the same way we have an institutional entity, and Ralph is big on the absolute necessity for institutions as a student of governance. If we have an institution that day in and day out is now responsible beyond the departmental work that has been excellent for the last 40 years set up by Tom Adams with the Coastal Zone Management Unit, we are now broadening it because we recognize that in the same way we have an institution to fix our roads and to build bridges and to deal with drainage on a daily basis, there must be a similar institution to be able to protect our coastal areas and our oceans, and by extension, therefore, the significant amount of marine life that is there. Like the Dominican Republic and others in the region, we made a determination when we issued our blue bonds 3 years ago, where we did the Debt for Nature swap with the benefit of the Inter-American Development Bank and Nature Conservancy, that we would buy back a portion of our debt, and by reissuing the debt with the guarantees from those 2 entities, we have been able to save the equivalent of about what will be over 15 years, somewhere between 50 to 60 million US, depending on the movement of the yield of the bonds, and that money is immediately capitalizing the Barbados Marine Sustainability Trust, which will seek to ensure that 30% of our marine area becomes a marine protected area. That is roughly about 55,000 square kilometers. I say so because Barbados' land area is about 430 square kilometers. So that you begin to understand scale when we are protecting just 30%, and that 30% is the equivalent of 55,000 square kilometers. I am not the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but I believe my brother Ralph will allow me to say that his country too will benefit similarly, because while they too have limited land area, they are a massive ocean state just as we are. So these conversations, Mr. President, are not academic. They are real, and they will determine what kind of livelihoods our people will have. They will determine what percentage of our national budget must go to recovering from climate crises or biodiversity loss. They will determine what kind of national economic stability and social stability our countries can maintain. This decision this morning from the ICJ is utterly and absolutely critical for us, because by preserving that a state, in spite of losing some of its land territory to sea rise, can maintain its maritime boundaries is so important as it relates to the ability of that state to be able to continue to manage its affairs, particularly given that the ocean is the next frontier that we must face and manage as we go forward in managing the climate crisis of the world. The reality is that there is much down there, and we have to be careful with how we treat to it. There may be opportunities that can supplement how humans can live on this earth by exploration and exploitation. But the exploration and exploitation of our marine resources should not come at the expense of our marine life, and it should not be done recklessly without a clear and complete understanding of the consequences of our action, because we are just stewards of this planet for the time that the Lord has allowed us to be living on this earth. I hope that this effort will also cause other countries in the region to recognize that even as we go for innovative financial instruments like the debt for nature swap, that we have an obligation to be able first to help ourselves. In our case, and I know Ralph has a similar mechanism as well, we have just established and changed our catastrophe fund to a resilience and regeneration fund, in which every single employee and self-employed person in Barbados is now required to contribute 0.25% of their gross earnings with no cap. And every employer is required to match the amount of his employee by contribution to that resilience and regeneration fund. In addition, the government has committed to place in that fund 0.35% of GDP each and every year. I give you this information because when you hear me and others speak about the Bridgetown Initiative and the need for a fairer, more transparent financial system to allow us to meet the needs of people and planet, in other words, the broader SDGs and climate action, loss of biodiversity, it is not against the backdrop of us asking people to do something with a begging bowl that we are not prepared to do for ourselves. We are doing it for ourselves. But the scale of what we face is so great that it cannot be done in isolation. And to that extent, therefore, what we are trying to do is to preserve that which none of us can recreate again. We look at the majesty of that bird in that poster behind those sitting on that wall. We look at the beauty of the Kaiter Falls. We look at the fact that none of us in here have the capacity to give life to any of these animals that become extinct. But we have arrogance that would cause us to believe that it will not happen, when the evidence of history is that both civilizations fail and species become extinct. The only thing that is required for this process to continue unabated is for countries and citizens, and note I said citizens, to do nothing. It is the collective action of citizens and the action of countries that can stem this regrettable slide into a situation where we are putting at risk those living organisms and animals that literally are required to keep balance in the earth. I hope that we can find, in addition to the actions which we are doing to boost public education and sensitization of persons, the strength also to continue the battle to create the opportunities for financing and fiscal space. Because in a very real sense, in some instances, it is traditional practices that, even though they may not have carried us to the tipping point, the continued practices of many countries and groupings across the world can have the negative consequence of bringing species to the point of extinction. And it is that effort of education and engagement that cannot be ignored, while at the same time we must find the financial means to ensure that we are not asking them to sacrifice their living and to sacrifice their habitat for the benefit of an international public good. If we are to agree that there are global public goods, then there must be a dedicated financing mechanism for the maintenance of those global public goods. If not, we will ensure that a few carry a disproportionate burden that others are not prepared to carry. So, Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity to engage with the people of Guyana, but by extension, the people of the world who see that there is merit in joining this Global Biodiversity Alliance. Our own country, we have settled our National Strategic and Biodiversity Action Plan 2020 to 2025, and we'll be renewing it as we go forward to 2030. In our country, we have also settled a few missions, 6 missions, between now and 2030. And it is of note that the first one is maintaining on our land and in our marine environment a clean, beautiful, and healthy environment, without which the possibility of life, the quiet enjoyment of our environment, and indeed the prosperity of our people will be impossible. So let us bond together and ensure that our collective voices can also allow us to go where the courts, for the first time in history, have gone this morning and this month through the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the International Court of Justice. This is the reason we are here at this time doing this business. It is not by accident. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister Motley. I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting Her Excellency Maria Pinto, Vice President of the Republic of Ecuador, to address us. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, partners, and friends. I stand here before you today with deep gratitude and with a profound sense of purpose. As Vice President of Ecuador and as the representative of President Daniel Noboa, a head of state who has made the protection of biodiversity not only a national priority, but a personal and a global mission. Ecuador is one of the most biodiverse countries on Earth, but we know that biodiversity is not only counted in species. It is measured in well-being of people, in the health of our ecosystems, and in the opportunities we create for those who will come after us. In Ecuador, biodiversity is not an abstract concept. It is part of our daily lives. It lives in the Galapagos Islands, in the Amazon basin, and in our coastal mangroves, and in the ancestral knowledge of our indigenous and local communities. But it also lives in the child who has access to clean water, in the family that can earn a sustainable income while protecting the forest, in a young entrepreneur who builds a future by working with nature, not by exhausting it. Our vision is simple, but powerful. Biodiversity must be a driver of equity, of well-being, and of innovation. That is why, under President Noboa's leadership, Ecuador is building a new model, one that brings conservation and economic transformation together, placing both people and nature at the very heart of development. In the past year, we have taken bold and innovative steps to make this vision a reality. We executed the largest debt-to-nature swap in global history, achieving more than 500 million reduction in public debt stock and 800 million in debt services savings through 2035. To protect our rainforest. This will generate over 400 million for conservation, forest governance, and local livelihood in the Ecuadorian Amazon. We secure 50 years of guaranteed funding for Yasuni National Park, one of the world's most prestigious biodiversity sanctuaries, ensuring its protection across generations and beyond political cycles. We are applying blockchain technology, remote sensing, and the transparent tracking system to channel private investment toward measurable environmental outcomes. And this year, just 2 weeks ago, we introduced the Organic Law for Recovery of Protected Areas, a pioneering legal framework that opens the door to collaboration between public sector, private actors, and the communities to restore and sustainably manage our conservation areas. Let me be clear. This law, it's not about transferring ownership of or control of nature. It is about unlocking its potential in a responsible way, ensuring that those who live closest to the biodiversity are the first to benefit from it. It also represents a critical step in closing the gap toward achieving the 30 by 30 global target by enabling innovative and inclusive mechanisms to expand and strengthen protected areas with real impact in both ecosystem and communities. At the core, Ecuador believes that conservation and development must go hand by hand. We are investing in sustainable entrepreneurship with local communities, supporting ecotourism, regenerative agriculture, bio-based products, and circular economies. These efforts do more than protect the ecosystems. They generate incomes. They create dignified jobs. They address the root causes of poverty, especially in rural and indigenous areas. And we have seen a truth we must all remember. Where there is opportunity, there is less pressure to deforest. Where there is dignity, there is less risk of forced migration. Where there is hope, there is a stronger future for the next generations. But we don't stop there. We are connecting biodiversity with critical social outcomes. When we protect watersheds, we improve access to clean water, especially for children. When families earn income from nature-based enterprises, they are better able to feed their children, helping reduce child malnutrition, a challenge that is both moral and developmental. When conservation efforts support schools, clinics, and local infrastructure, they become a foundation for equity, not an obstacle for growth. Still, we know this path, it's not one we can walk alone. Ecuador calls on global community and especially the financial, technological, and political leaders gathered here to recognize a fundamental truth. Biodiversity is not just a global responsibility. It is a global opportunity. Let us expand, innovate mechanisms with debt for nature swaps. Let us promote inclusive legal framework like our protected areas law. Let us build platforms for climate and biodiversity finance that reach local actors directly, transparently, and with trust. In Ecuador, the state, civil society, and the private sector are coming together, not only to protect life, but to build a future where people and ecosystems thrive side by side. On behalf of President Noboa and the people of Ecuador, I reaffirm our commitment to leading and learning as part of a new generation of nations. Nations that value nature, nations that invest in people, nations that understand that biodiversity is not a burden to carry, but a potential to build on and to share. Let us turn promises into policies. Let us turn policies into partnerships. And let us ensure that the forest we defend today becomes the foundation of justice, prosperity, and peace for tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank Her Excellency Maria Pinto for those extraordinary words, but more importantly, the strong action and results of her government and the people of Ecuador. We congratulate you on all your successes and on the proactive work that you lead in terms of biodiversity and the environment. It's now my pleasure to invite former President of the Republic of Colombia, His Excellency Ivan Duque.
President Ali, President Abinader, Prime Minister Gonsalves, Prime Minister Motley, Vice President Pinto, distinguished guests, and also members of this alliance. Some weeks ago, somebody said in an article that was published in a very recognized newspaper around the world that we were going to experience some kind of a setback on the enthusiasm in the fight against climate change. Well, I have to say that if there's anybody who doubts that the world lacks of leadership in order to confront these challenges, today is your answer. We have here leaders, heads of state, people from organizations that are devoted not only to continue working against the consequences of climate change, but people who are conscious enough to bring together the concept of carbon neutrality and nature positive, not as an international demand, but as a moral need and as a way to ensure development. Congratulations, President Ali, for putting together this coalition. The challenges we face are big. We have lost in the last 5 decades almost 70% of the world's wildlife. We have seen that land degradation and also negative use of land has become the second largest source of greenhouse gases emissions. And we know that if we don't act promptly and with the right instruments, we are going to see most of our ecosystems suffer like no other time before. We're completely sure that this Global Biodiversity Alliance is aimed to put practical elements for action, which involve market-driven, nature-based solutions. Today, the world is facing enormous amount of debt. So governments don't regularly have the fiscal space that in other times would allow them to have budgetary resources to be allocated. According to the IMF, almost the 95% threshold of debt to GDP has become the standard globally, sadly to say. Also, bilateral donors are also changing some of their priorities. So where is the liquidity going to come from to finance most of the efforts that we have discussed this morning? They need to come from the market. But the only way that the market can rapidly mobilize those resources is by having the right instruments at hand that would allow not only to do good, but to do well, and allow the countries to mobilize the capital and put it together into elements that are measurable and scrutinized. So that's why I think this alliance has to focus on 7 clear instruments of smart financing. The first one will be debt swaps. And we have heard from Ecuador that the debt swaps have worked on size and on impact. We've seen the examples also of Barbados. We have seen the impact that Belize, for example, has been able to create in a positive way by mobilizing through these mechanisms the multilateral finance. So we need to have more debt swaps that allow countries to substitute debt for resources that are based in conservation and restoration. Carbon credits. Many people have criticized the carbon credits in the last 5 or 6 years, but the fact is that the market keeps on increasing its volume. Why? Because it's able to allow companies around the world to compensate some of the damage they have created by allowing the capital to move to those places where the conservation of territories are taking place with precise advantages. So we need a market credit that introduces more elements of integrity and transparency. But there's no other way different than these market mechanisms that can bring the resources that are needed, at least in the next 5 years, to meet the global NDCs. The same thing happens with biodiversity credits. We are required to put nature positive standards before the eyes of investors. So if a country is protecting biodiversity, like for example Guyana is doing, why Guyana should not be able to bring those resources and increase the impact that has a global reference for the rest of the countries? Why should not we work together in order to have taxonomies in which most of the countries would list not only their basic KPIs, but things that will be concretely measured in the short term? We had the impact in Colombia of issuing the first green taxonomy in the Western Hemisphere and launched it at the New York Stock Exchange that allowed investors to see that products like biodiversity bonds or carbon bonds or green bonds will be a mechanism that would allow the market not only to demand more of that, but to be able to connect the resources with the most important KPIs that we define as a nation. I have to make a reference on guarantees. And this involves multilateral funding. Most of the local governments in the world require long-term financing for biodiversity protection or for climate action. But when they request a guarantee from a multilateral institution, that guarantee is going to be accounted as a debt for the national government. So the incentives of national governments sometimes to provide those guarantees are not there. And I think the fact that this coalition is setting very clear KPIs can also, President Ali, be a way to call the multilateral system to create a specific guarantee resources that can allow to provide those funding to local governments and also to regional governments and institutions. And something that I had the pleasure to discuss with Prime Minister Motley when we both were in COP26 is that the IMF needs to create facilities for those countries that are embracing biodiversity protection policies and climate action policies so that the investment could come at front without being accounted what is called above the fiscal deficit threshold. Why? Because if those resources are now mobilized now, they are going to create a further fiscal pressure in the future. So those special facilities through special purpose vehicles should also be the ones that this alliance promotes. So ladies and gentlemen, if we look at just these 7 basic elements that I just mentioned, we are able now to connect those elements of finance with the objectives that this alliance wants to achieve in the next years. 30 before 30. Yes, 30 by 30 is important, but 2030 looks pretty far away. If we can encourage countries to reach that 30% before 30, and we are able to mobilize the resources through these market mechanisms, the incentives will be rightly aligned. We also need to define that protecting biodiversity is linked with food security, natural security, and protecting the supply chains around the globe. We need to create elements that avoid a further degradation of ecosystems. We are in an Amazonic country, and just the Amazon has lost in the last 4 decades the equivalent of France and Germany together inland. And people may believe that stopping that level of deforestation seems impossible. Well, the response is no, because we're in a country like Guyana that has been able to keep 95% of its territory in tropical jungle successfully. So it's important that carbon sinking is rightly compensated. The Amazon biome is sinking every year almost 15% of all the global greenhouse gases emissions. But we need to put the right pricing on carbon. Because if we look at Guyana, for example, a country that is rich because has among many of its richnesses the possibility of hosting 11 billion barrels of oil, which makes it the per capita largest producer of oil in the world, is almost as important, if not more, that this country has 90% of its territory in tropical forest, but just on the carbon sinking potential at the right price per ton of carbon will be almost the same value as the oil reserves this country has. Now, is the world putting the right price on carbon? I don't think so yet. But this alliance needs to bring to Belém do Pará, to COP30, that discussion, because if there is a global coalition to protect biodiversity with clear KPIs, with market-driven nature-based solutions, we definitely need to bring the discussion to the fair carbon pricing so that this becomes a reality and that countries can put their money where their mouth is. And let me finish by saying, why am I so happy to be in Guyana in this conference? President Ali made a decision, and it is that the protection of biodiversity and climate action is a strategic vision in the development strategy of Guyana. Yes, Guyana is using the richness of the underground to defeat the poverty on the ground. And yes, there's a clear idea that no molecule should be left behind, that all molecules count, and all the sectors need to contribute in a low carbon development strategy. But what I value, if there is a leader in Latin America who has called investors to look at the Amazon from a market perspective to improve and protect this sanctuary of biodiversity that is the Amazon biome, it has been President Ali and Guyana. few weeks from now, when we reach Belén do Pará, many people will ask, what is it going to be the biggest outcome? And yes, we have seen good COPs and bad COPs. We have seen COPs where there are a lot of pledges and no disbursements. We have seen COPs where there are funds announced, but we never see the impact speeding at the same velocity as the speeches that were given in certain spaces. But I'm pretty sure that the greatest opportunity is that this coalition will be able to host in Belén do Pará a roundtable with the largest participation of CEOs that will be at COP30 for one simple reason. Investing in nature is investing in the present and in the future. Investing in nature is a way to maximize the value for money of all the actions that can be taken place to protect the species that are endangered. We were able in a country like Colombia to pass from 13% to 30% declared protected areas on the ground, and from 14% to 38% in maritime territory. With President Abinader, we expanded the Beata Corridor. And when people ask me, how can the private sector support this? I would say, we should think on blue carbon credits and biodiversity credits and try to accelerate in the next 5 years the largest mobilization of market resources to the protection of global ecosystems. Land degradation and negative use of land, if it were a country, it will be the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases. If the Amazon doesn't stop the deforestation rate that we currently face, in 5 years it will become a net emitter. So this is the time, the unique time, to make this global biodiversity alliance based on practical elements to be achieved, that the private sector after Belén do Pará could find in those mechanisms the right way to give the resources that will create aggregated value chains with indigenous communities in these biomes, but also invite other global biomes like the ones in Africa and in Asia to be part of this coalition. The right balance of being an energy superpower for Latin America and the Caribbean, like Guyana is, and being a nature superpower is because ideology is not what drives this action. It's rationality, it's sound policy, it's market mechanisms, and it's a clear vision that investing in nature is a way to create development. It is a pleasure for me as a former head of state, but most importantly as an ambassador for the Global Campaign for Nature, and as a founder of the Innovation for Development Foundation, to be part of this funding members initiative today, to sign the Georgetown Declaration. And let's be all aware that this declaration goes beyond just good intentions. This is as practical as it can be if we all bring together the markets with the right instruments to make indigenous communities, to make governments, and to make all the entrepreneurial spirit based on nature, that doing good and doing well is possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to a message from the Honorable David Lammy, Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs, United Kingdom.
Friends, I wish I was with you in Guyana, but I'm with you in spirit, or perhaps more accurately, my spirit is not far away in the Guyanese rainforest at Sophia Point. My wife and I founded the Conservation Centre there some years ago, and it's taught me so much about protection of our natural world. I know, as you all know, that biodiversity loss is as much a threat as climate change. The impact of lost biodiversity hotspots is felt from Georgetown to London in the food we eat and the air we breathe. But I also know, as you all know, that we have the means to stop and even reverse levels of biodiversity loss. Mobilising more finance in innovations like green bonds and biodiversity credits, strengthening education and research to identify and promote nature-based solutions, and above all, empowering local and indigenous communities, the best custodians of nature there are. The British government has done a lot on all of these points in the past year. We're the top contributor to the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, and we're working with the city to get more sustainable finance to developing economies. We continue to back innovative research on nature like the new £24 million National Environment Research Council programme, launched this year to support ambitious, high-risk, high-reward environmental projects. And we're driving forward programmes on issues like strengthening local people's forest tenure rights. This work matters, but it can only succeed with sufficient political will. And so I want to congratulate you, President Ali, for launching this alliance and bringing together such a powerful group of advocates for nature in Guyana. Your Excellency, as you know, I cherish my Guyanese heritage. My work at Sophia Point is just one way I try to give back to the country of my ancestors. But the incredible biodiversity found there is not my inheritance or even the local communities or Guyana's. It is a gift from past generations to all humanity, a gift all of us have a duty to preserve so that we too may pass it on to the next generation. Thank you, all of you, for your efforts to ensure that we do just that.
So we'll ask the High Commissioner to convey our highest regards to the Honorable David Lammy. We'll now invite the Honorable Orlando Habet, Minister of Sustainable Development and Climate Change of Belize, to address us.
I was just about to say that, how dare you put me to speak after former President Ivan Duque, but Mr. Lamy saved me. President Irfan Ali, Prime Ministers, Excellencies, friends, greetings from Prime Minister John Briceño and the government and people of Belize. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework describes a necessary and ambitious journey for the benefit of nature and humanity. It challenges the global community to live in harmony with nature by 2050. This can only be achieved through global collaboration and coordinated efforts. Belize, uniquely positioned in Central America and the Caribbean regions, has a special vantage point in promoting biodiversity cooperation and integration across both regions. These regional blocs foster high-level political alignment centered on common vulnerabilities. This enables more efficient resource mobilization. Science, knowledge, technology transfer, and capacity development are core to these blocks. Belize is on course in meeting the 30 by 30 conservation goal. We have expanded the marine conservation zones to approximately 27%. We estimate achieving 30% before 2030. On the terrestrial side, we have 39% in protected areas of 60% forest cover. We are effectively implementing the National Ecosystem Restoration Strategy. Efforts are being placed in mangrove and riparian forest restoration. The Greening Belize initiative seeks to plant 1 million trees over the next 5 years. Restoring ecosystem connectivity and ecosystem functions is essential in building climate resilience, both for biodiversity and for human benefit. Belize's nationally determined contributions, NDC 3.0, scales up our ambition and outlines a bold agenda for climate adaptation and mitigation across all sectors. It now additionally integrates clearer linkages between biodiversity and climate, improving the coordination and increasing successful implementation of both agendas. Our National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, NBSAP 2025 to 2035, a 10-year roadmap to positively impact biodiversity conservation, is well underway to being finalized. The 10-year strategy outlines clear priorities and defines critical success factors, aligning with the NDC 3.0, the National Ecosystem Restoration Strategy, and the Kunming-Montreal GBF. But there are challenges. Sector development, many times incompatible with biodiversity objectives, remains complex. Competing land uses continue to fragment our ecosystems. Misalignments of policy and legislation prove to be ineffective. Implementation of the NBSAP and NDC 3.0 will require over $170 million US, requiring intense finance mobilization efforts. Limited institutional capacities restrict the pace of implementing programs and reduces the scope in many cases. This is even more particular when integrating community and indigenous peoples in the management and governance aspects of biodiversity. However, NBSAPs and ambitious NDCs are only plans and policies and paper without the finance for implementation. We acknowledge our shared responsibility and reiterate our readiness to collaborate, to innovate, and to co-invest in solutions that safeguard biodiversity, support livelihood, and build resilience. And just like the 5 Cs, which focuses on the Caribbean agenda, and not putting aside the global initiatives, but we need more implementation agencies that are Caribbean, that feel what we feel, that know our culture, that understand the needs and can see the gaps that need to be filled for SIDS. We desperately need the will and collaboration of the global community, the same way it was done after 9/11, the tsunami of 2004, and COVID-19, and of course at the Rio Conventions when we agreed that our Mother Earth was in peril. Our ambition must be matched by solidarity. Our efforts must be underpinned by coordinated regional platforms, strengthened institutions, and inclusive governance. Aldous Huxley reminds us, facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. We in Belize will strongly support this Global Biodiversity Alliance. Thank you.
We will now go to a video message from the Honorable Sri Koman, Vice Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs of India.
His Excellency, President Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, my colleague, the High Commissioner of India to Guyana, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Government of India, I would like to extend warmest greetings to His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, the government and the people of Guyana on the successful organization of the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit dealing with a number of pertinent themes, implementation strategies, and practical approaches to biodiversity management and sustainable development. It is the timely initiative calling on the global community to take concerted action for the preservation and promotion of biodiversity. After all, we have only one Earth and we need to preserve it for our future generations. India has consistently advocated the need for effective measures towards biodiversity management through a collective and coordinated approach that involves government, non-governmental organizations, think tanks, academic community, and industry. It also reflects our collective vision as representatives of the Global South for a coordinated approach both within the existing multilateral frameworks as well as individually as global citizens who strive for the welfare of every living being with whom we share our beautiful planet. This is also central to our vision of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the whole world as one family. We would like to appreciate the biodiversity management efforts made by Guyana, with whom we share a long-standing, mutually beneficial partnership based on our shared historical heritage and common values. We are aware of Guyana's commendable record in the field of tackling the adverse impact of climate change and its commitment to preserving the natural habitat while pursuing a path of rapid growth and development. We believe that economic development and preservation of biodiversity are not mutually exclusive. India is known for its own efforts in the direction of biodiversity preservation while pursuing economic growth and development through innovative practices, blending scientific applications with traditional knowledge. India has a tremendous range of species and ecosystem diversity and stands among the 12 mega-diverse countries in the world. Over 100,000 species of fauna and 55,000 species of flora have been documented in the 10 biogeographic zones of the country. There are 18 biosphere reserves and 99 conservation reserves. Among the protected areas, India has 106 national parks and 564 sanctuaries, covering a total area of 170,000 square kilometers. India is a signatory to several major international conventions relating to the conservation and management of wildlife, including the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, and the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES. There is a growing consciousness about the value of biodiversity and the need for its conservation. The Government of India has taken several steps to protect our biodiversity. India's National Environment Policy, NEP, promotes synergy and coherence for sustainable development among all sectors and policies. Efforts are being made to harness the traditional knowledge that exists in our country for management and conservation of our biodiversity. These efforts are also inherently linked to the preservation of culture and food security, and our tribal communities have an invaluable role in these efforts. Representatives from the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, are here in Guyana today to share their experiences and expertise and how it has contributed to the preservation and management of India's flora and fauna. I would also like to bring your attention to Prime Minister Modi's Mission Life initiative, which highlights the close link between individual behavior and biodiversity preservation and management. During the second India CARICOM summit, we have expressed our desire to work closely with our CARICOM partners. They are in a unique position when it comes to biodiversity preservation and require support in their conservation efforts. India will be happy to share its experience and expertise in this field with Guyana and also with CARICOM countries and other partners in the Global South. It reflects our shared commitment towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals and our collective welfare. I once again congratulate His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali and his successful efforts by the government to organize this summit. Thank you and namaskar.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, Mexico congratulates and expresses its deep gratitude to the government of Guyana for convening this significant gathering of the international community, which will bring together world leaders, scientists, representatives of indigenous peoples, and actors from the private sector with the aim of joining efforts to protect biodiversity. As one of the world's megadiverse nations, home to extraordinary biodiversity and enriched by cultural heritage of 68 indigenous peoples, Mexico fully recognizes the urgent need to consolidate international efforts aimed at conserving and restoring nature. This is essential to ensuring ecological resilience and the well-being of current and future generations. In this spirit, we welcome the establishment of the Global Biodiversity Alliance and acknowledge its potential to serve as a strategic platform for mobilizing global commitments and scaling up action. We particularly value its emphasis on advancing innovative financing mechanisms, including green bonds and biodiversity credits, which can significantly enhance long-term conservation efforts. In a context marked by growing climate impacts, shrinking public resources, and multiple global crises, the protection of biodiversity demands not only political will, but innovative, predictable, and equitable financial solutions. The GBA should respond to this challenge by leveraging new instruments, fostering cross-sectional collaboration, and supporting the leadership of developing megadiverse countries that continue to take ambitious actions despite financial concerns. Mexico is firmly committed to advancing international objectives such as the 30 by 30 target for biodiversity conservation and promoting a just transition towards a sustainable ocean economy. The development of the GBA should contribute to and complement these goals through coherent and aligned action. I thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now go to His Excellency Mr. Martin Ngoga, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations.
Your Excellency President Muhammad Ali, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, first of all, I wish to express President Paul Kagame's regards to you, Mr. President, and to you all, for the honor of inviting us to be part of this gathering. He would have wanted to be here in person, but because of other exigencies, he couldn't come. So he sends his regards and best wishes. Your Excellency, I also want to join others to welcome the ruling of the International Court of Justice, which has given very good clarifications on the legal basis for which we should continue with our efforts. Rwanda is proud to be part of this movement, and we want to reaffirm our commitment to continue to be part of this movement. Rwanda wants to share with you some modest steps we have taken in this regard. In Rwanda, we have mainstreamed biodiversity protection into all national development sectors. This integrated approach is a cornerstone of our conservation and restoration efforts, enabling us to sustainably manage our biological diversity. Like many other developing countries, Rwanda faces limited financial capacity, which hinders its efforts to meet commitments under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework targets. Despite these constraints, Rwanda continues to make meaningful contributions to global biodiversity goals. One such achievement is the designation of Gishwati Mukura, the country's youngest national park, as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Building on such progress, Rwanda is also advancing long-term solutions through the Biodiversity Finance Initiative, which aims to identify and mobilize sustainable sources of funding for biodiversity conservation. Moreover, Rwanda public-private partnership has become central to Rwanda's conservation strategy. Collaborations with the private sector, such as those in Akagera and Nyungwe National Parks, have produced measurable outcomes, including the successful reintroduction of lions and rhinos, species that were once extinct in our country. This Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit comes at a pivotal moment as countries work to operationalize the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe the summit presents a critical opportunity to drive forward practical solutions and renew the political commitment needed to meet global biodiversity targets. And Your Excellency, Rwanda salutes your leadership in this regard. In this context, Rwanda is guided by its revised National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. In alignment with the Target 19, we have set an ambitious goal to mobilize $500 million from a blend of public and private sector, national and international sources. Yet we recognize that financing alone will not suffice. Accelerating implementation, strengthening partnerships, and broadening engagement, especially with the private sector and investors, are equally essential. Biodiversity is the heartbeat of our planet. Let us act now and together to protect it and to safeguard our shared future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And I want to assure all participants that we have a very active team that will be working with all of the states to have at least 140 signatories by the end of COP30 on this Biodiversity Alliance platform. So we have a very active mechanism. So we want the message to be strong and loud, but also the commitment to action to be equally forceful. I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting Her Excellency Michelle Mochet, the UN Assistant Secretary General and Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Latin America. Please.
His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Your Excellencies, Presidents and Heads of State of Dominican Republic, Barbados, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ecuador, querido Presidente Iván Duque, distinguished delegates, dear friends, all protocols observed. As UN Assistant Secretary General and UNDP's Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, it is an immense honor to address you in this high-level segment of the plenary of the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit on behalf of Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General. In this segment led by His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Ali, President of Guyana. Mr. President, I convey to you the warm greetings of our Secretary General, our gratitude for your hospitality welcoming us, and our recognitions to Guyana's leadership in biodiversity conservation as it is reflected in your Green State Development Strategy, your Low Carbon Development Strategy 2030, and of course by hosting this important summit. I would like also to salute and acknowledge the strong collaboration of the United Nations country team in Guyana, especially the contributions of UNEP, UNDRR, FAO, and of course UNDP, in supporting national biodiversity vision and efforts under the leadership of Jan Camus, UN resident coordinator in the country. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear friends, environmental action is more urgent than ever before. This is an evidence-based affirmation. The world's temperature increase of 2.5 to 2.9 Celsius degrees is threatening irreversible damage to our climate, ecosystems, and human development at an alarming rate. Since 1970, monitored wildlife populations have plummeted 69%. Land degradation and resource scarcity are exacerbating conflict, challenging governance, and undermining our shared development gains. And the biodiversity financing gap now exceeds $200 billion per year. But evidence also tells us that 2025 is a pivotal year to step up to the challenge of shifting from nature negative to nature positive pathways, and recognizing the value of nature as the foundation of thriving, resilient societies and economies, as already explained by President Duque. And the time for action is now. This won't happen by accident, and there won't be another chance. And this is precisely why are we here today, convened under the leadership of Guyana. In a world more interdependent and interconnected than ever before, only a renewed multilateralism will lead us to effectively address our common challenges. We know what needs to be done, as the video shown this morning showed. We need bold collective action to turn nature into an investment, not a cost. Earlier this week, the UN Secretary General reminded us that despite the enormous headwinds, we have reasons to be optimistic regarding what can be achieved when countries come together with conviction and focus. We saw this conviction and focus at Nice at the 3rd UN Ocean Conference. We saw it again in Seville at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, where countries agreed on a new global vision for finance, one that strengthens the voice and participation of developing countries in the institutions shaping their and our future. And we're confident that this momentum will carry into COP30 in Brazil later this year. The Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit is a cornerstone of that momentum. It reflects the Sustainable Development Goal 617 in action, a global partnership held in an exuberant country with more than 85% forest cover, showing that leadership in biodiversity can come from those at the front line of conservation. As the United Nations Development Programme, we reaffirm our commitment to double down efforts in coordination with the UN country teams and development partners to continue supporting national biodiversity strategies and objectives, linking nature, climate, and development as part of the same, and translating high-level commitments as the one including in the declaration into tangible results. From aligning national biodiversity strategies and action plans with nationally determined contributions, the NDCs, to promoting sustainable land use and restoring ecosystems. Through a $3.9 billion portfolio, our Nature Pledge will continue working with countries to deliver on the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, making nature central to resilience, development, and sustainable growth. And through our biodiversity finance initiative, BioFin, active now in 133 countries and with $1.6 billion mobilized, we will continue supporting countries to design and implement financing solutions that align national priorities with global biodiversity goals, institutionalizing biodiversity investments into national budgets and policies, and opening new markets, ensuring long-term and systemic impact. Before concluding, Excellencies, dear friends, as Regional Director for Latin America and the Caribbean, I cannot avoid referring to the most biodiverse region in the world and the most democratic of the developing regions in the world. And I cannot miss the opportunity to refer to the unique potential that this region offers to lead the way forward a nature-based development, a leadership that we are seeing and witnessing in this room. And doing this through democratic mechanisms, which is not minor. Our 2025 Regional Human Development Report, Under Pressure, Recalibrating the Future of Development, and our upcoming Democracy and Development Report, to which President Duque honored us with his contributions in this important effort, are invitations to untap this potential, to reimagine our collective future, and to identify the escape valves to transform the enormous levels of pressure over democracies and development in our region into a positive force for improving lives and creating shared prosperity, which at the end translates into constructing and building peace. And one thing is very clear out of these two reports: this would be only possible through biodiversity conservation as central to all development efforts and through multilateral cooperation. And once again, this is a matter of choice. This won't happen by accident, as Prime Minister Motley already mentioned. Excellencies, dear friends, let this summit of Global Biodiversity Alliance be a true inflection point. Let it be a moment to inspire one another, to exchange solutions and forge partnerships that will deliver real, lasting impact for every country represented here and for the planet that we all share, with a sense of urgency, but also with firm hope for what we can achieve acting together, protecting biodiversity together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will now be proceeding to hear from some very important organizations that champion the academic work, scientific work, and the creation of policies continuously on issues of biodiversity, nature, climate, and financing. We will start by listening to His Excellency Martin Hildebrand, the Secretary General of the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization, ACTO.
Mr. President,
distinguished participants, colleagues, friends. Thank you for this opportunity to join your meeting here on the Biodiversity Alliance, which is extremely important for all of us. 2 years ago, in Belém do Pará, the presidents of the 8 countries got together, the presidents of the 8 countries of the Amazon, and they strengthened again the Amazon Cooperation Treaty Organization. When I say they strengthened it, they came to an agreement in many points. But I can say the main points or the main categories that we can talk about or we can mention or going to mention right now are 3. One is avoid the tipping point. And when they were talking about avoiding the tipping point, of course, we all know the importance of the Amazon. We know what will happen if it becomes a salinization. We know that we will lose the water that is essential for over 70% of the GDP of all South America. We know that the temperature will go up 2 degrees. We know it will be a global disaster. So obviously, avoiding the tipping point is fundamental. And yet, I would just like to highlight something here, that avoiding the tipping point, we have to stop deforestation, and the countries are doing their best. We have to do restoration, and they're also doing a great job. And we talk about 30-30. Now, if the Amazon were a country, we have 47% under protection, and we're still collapsing. So it's not just a question of how many hectares we are covering. Each country is doing a great job. But how does the system work? How does it function? Where are we restoring? What are we connecting? How are we keeping the system going? That's the fundamental point. We have to consolidate a lot. It is fundamental to measure this by how many hectares, but also it's fundamental to measure this by what has been called environmental services or environmental contributions to the global system and the global life. This is fundamental. How much water we are producing in what we have called the flying rivers. How are we keeping down the temperatures? How are we resilient to the fires? What is happening there? How is the system resilient? How is the system operating? And therefore, I think we have to look at the Amazon as a bioma and how it works. It is not enough. It is fundamental, and yet not enough to talk about the 8 countries and what they're doing. It is fundamental. And that is part of my job, to promote the collaboration, or it is my job, to promote the collaboration among the 8 countries to protect the well-being of the forest, the well-being of environmental well-being, and the social well-being of the rainforest. But it is also fundamental that we see this as a system and we work as a system. That we join the efforts of the countries, of all the 8 countries, in this sense, that we make a commitment of all the 8 countries that we will all contribute in a binding agreement, in an important agreement, a binding agreement that we will collaborate to maintain the functioning of the rainforest, to avoid the tipping point. And there has been a suggestion, which is very interesting, of creating a common NDC. That is an NDC, each country commits itself to collaborate with the other countries in protecting or in maintaining the functioning of the rainforest to prevent the tipping point. This is one of the topics that are being discussed now at the meeting in Bogota on the 22nd of August among the presidents, to take these ideas and these commitments to COP30 among the 8 countries. Another topic that they highlighted, the presidents, which is terribly important, of course, is sustainable development. And this has been spoken a lot. President Duque highlighted how this can be financed with natural capital, which is fundamental. We have to find new ways of financing and new ways of development for the rainforest. We cannot continue, obviously, with extractivism as we have done so far. We cannot go on looking at the Amazon as a collection of objects just to produce our well-being. We have to start looking at life as such in the Amazon, as this value, the capital value. Just to give it a very simple example, we cannot only look at the coconut, we have to look at the coconut tree. We have to look at life. We have to see how it's working. And this is fundamental, and we're moving along those lines, and it is fundamental. And we have with these different bonus of carbon bonus and we have biodiversity bonus. We're moving along those lines. But this is fundamental because the well-being of the 40 million people there has to be taken care of. We cannot protect the rainforest and protect the environment at the expense of the well-being of the people, but we cannot have the well-being of the people at the expense of the forest. So we must work together and create together. The third point that they brought up the presidents was the civil society participation. This didn't exist before in ACTO. Now it's brought up very strongly. It is undoubtedly necessary. We cannot do this, the governments cannot do this alone. We need the participation. It's fundamental, the participation of all, of the scientists, of the indigenous people, of the religious movements, of the academy. All of us have to participate if we want to protect the forest, if we want to save the forest. So this is fundamental also, and it's another point that's being discussed in Bogota right now to take to the COP30 being discussed by the presidents. The participation of the civil society as a fundamental, and that is what we are doing here, all of us, and I do hope that all of us will be able to come to COP30 and will be able to speak more or less, as far as possible, the same language, more or less the same view. Let us try and work together with the civil society, with the indigenous people that have been mentioned several times. They not only are terribly important. How much do we talk about biodiversity? How little do we talk about cultural diversity? There are different ways of being a human being. There are different ways of relating to an environment. The indigenous people are not talking about our rational scientific approach. They're talking about an intimate approach, a way of living with the forest. They are nature. Forest and they are one and they live together. If we want to go back to nature, if we want to get back to nature, which we have to, the indigenous people will inspire us. And we have the privilege still of having different ways of thinking in the Amazon. We should listen to them, we should support them, and not only benefit sharing, but that they sit at the table and that we start managing the forest together. So we have a lot to work, we're doing it. I wouldn't say we're optimistic, I do say we have to go on fighting, we have to go on struggling, because the situation is critical. But I do hope that now, in the next COP30, we will be able to go together, all of us, indigenous people, civil society, governments, along the same lines, and show the world that we are protecting the rainforest. Not only talking about the mitigation of CO2, because actually in the Amazon we don't produce or we don't emit more than 2%. At a global level, we're not that important. But certainly we're important if we're protecting the environment. Certainly we are important if we are protecting the biodiversity, if we are protecting the forest, the indigenous people, and the local people. So I do hope that we'll all be able to get together at the COP30 and really make a strong position to the world that we are doing this and we are really committed to protecting the rainforest. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to remind participants that tomorrow we'll have the COP presidents here with us. So you will want to take that opportunity also to have engagement with the presidency of COP so that you can start your work for COP from tomorrow right here. I now have the honor of inviting Her Excellency Dr. Carla Barnett, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Community.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, other excellencies, heads of state and government, founding members of the Global Biodiversity Alliance, representatives of international and regional organizations, diplomatic corps, ladies and gentlemen. I am pleased to join you for this plenary session, the first plenary session of the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit, convened in one of our region's most biodiverse states. I commend His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, and our host for this initiative, which has brought together leaders, scientists, indigenous voices, and innovators in a positive move to consolidate global efforts towards biodiversity protection. Biodiversity underpins the health of ecosystems, sustains livelihoods, and supports cultural traditions within the Caribbean community and globally. Our community is a hot spot of biodiversity, rich with endemic species, coral reefs, mangroves, rainforests, wetlands, and freshwater systems. CARICOM's biodiversity isn't just ecologically rich, it is economically vital as our rich ecosystems support food security, tourism, and coastal protection, while also offering vital services such as storm buffering and climate regulation. Forests in countries like Guyana, Belize, and Suriname store significant carbon, presenting opportunities for climate finance. We have heard a lot of that today. Less well documented and understood is CARICOM's rich genetic diversity. This holds potential for pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, and biotechnology. In addition, the traditional knowledge of indigenous and local communities, which possess valuable knowledge about species and ecosystems, can be integrated into sustainable development and protected under intellectual property frameworks. This is an area that holds much potential and which can benefit from increased technical and scientific cooperation, as well as strategic partnerships that can emerge under this Global Biodiversity Alliance. CARICOM has played an important role in the multilateral environment and development agenda in advocating to safeguard global natural resources through the holding of significant conferences on biological diversity. In the Bahamas, for example, the Conference of the Parties on the Convention on Biological Diversity. CARICOM has also piloted resolutions on sustainable development of the Caribbean Sea for present and future generations, and anchored the negotiations under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, the BBNJ. Our biological resources, however, face a number of threats, including climate change, as this region is particularly vulnerable due to our small land masses, low elevation, and dependence on climate-sensitive sectors. Sea level rise threatens coastal habitats, mangroves, seagrass beds, and turtle nesting sites, and resultant saltwater intrusion affects freshwater ecosystems. Warmer ocean temperatures trigger bleaching and mass die-off in coral reefs, and as hurricanes and tropical storms become more frequent and destructive, they cause widespread habitat destruction, pollution, and displacement of species. Man-made impacts threaten CARICOM's biodiversity as well, and invasive species and overexploitation, such as overfishing, illegal logging, and unregulated water use, alter ecosystems and threaten species. As CARICOM seeks to balance economic growth and development with ecological sustainability, it has been actively responding to biological and biodiversity loss through a mix of policy development, international collaboration, and regional initiatives. We have recognized that we must be proactive to flip the switch from vulnerability to resilience. Some of our key policy responses include the articulation of the Caribbean Community Environment and Natural Resources Policy Framework, which is an umbrella policy to guide sustainable management of environment and natural resources across our member states. The draft CARICOM Biodiversity Strategy, which is being aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to promote harmonized conservation efforts and sustainable use of biodiversity resources. Vision 25 by 2025, no 25 by 2025 plus 5, the regional plan to reduce CARICOM food import bill by boosting local agriculture integrates biodiversity into food security and production systems. Proactive engagement in international agreements and treaties, as evidenced by the region's strong presence at the 16th Conference of Parties on Biological Diversity and our leading role in negotiating this treaty on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Partnerships, for example, with the European Union, the Organization of African, Caribbean, and Pacific States, and the UN Environmental Program to build the member states' capacity to implement the biodiversity cluster of multilateral environmental agreements. So we're engaged in all of those activities. We have been making steady progress, driven by some key partnerships, but attention is needed to address enforcement and governance. It is recognized that capacity building and funding for environmental protection and regulation agencies remain priorities, as well as the need for strengthened mechanisms to enhance community engagement and local stewardship. And perhaps most importantly, we must do more to align biodiversity management and conservation with national development plans. This summit is therefore well poised to allow for attention to be paid on how to encourage constructive engagements on partnerships in technical and scientific cooperation and in financing for biodiversity. It will also allow for discussions between commercial users of biodiversity with provider countries on areas including access to financing and putting biodiversity back on the path to recovery. It is my hope that the collective will demonstrated by your presence here leads to results in positive outcomes that will safeguard biodiversity resources for current and future generations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carla Barnett. I'll now invite Dr. Sanjayan, the Chief Executive Officer of Conservation International, to address us. And we want to thank CI for the enormous work that they have been doing with us and in the region. Please.
Your Excellencies, President Ali, distinguished delegates, colleagues, and friends, it's a real honor for me to be here in Guyana, a country that is not just rich in biodiversity, but rich in vision. Of course, Guyana stands at the intersection of two great ecosystems, so ecoregions. You have the Guyana Shield and you have the Amazon Basin. And it's home to intact forests, wetlands, mangroves, grasslands that support extraordinary wildlife and biodiversity and stores billions of tons of carbon, all of the things that you've heard today. But what sets Guyana apart for me is not just your natural wealth. It's not even your mineral wealth. It's really your visionary leadership. And right now, the world needs leadership. We need leadership. Look, I was born in Sierra Leone. I grew up in the forest as a child. My fondest memories were walking into the forest after a big tree had been cut down and finding little animals in the canopy, chameleons, snakes, lizards, which I would bring home, keep for a while, and after some time my mother would release them or they would just disappear. For me, I was prompted by love. That's what I bring to the table. I love nature. I couldn't live without it. And my colleagues, many of whom I know here today, Christophe from Frankfurt Zoological, Enrique from Andes Amazon, or Roberto, who I haven't seen for a long time from WWF, I know for a fact we are motivated by love. That is what brought us to the table. And I suspect for many of you heads of state, there's a similar feeling as well. But I'm here to tell you that love alone is not enough. You know, at the same time that I was collecting those animals, my father actually worked for the forest company that logged those trees. It's called Forest Industries Corporation. And he didn't do it because he liked logging trees. He's an accountant. He did it because he thought it was going to benefit the country. He thought it was going to help put money in people's pockets in a very remote part of Africa. It really didn't end up doing that. Sierra Leone didn't experience the boom from exploiting their natural wealth that they expected to see. So really at the end of the day, why are we here? We are here because world leaders are convening. There's an incredible breakthrough that is happening today. Those of us who were motivated by love now have champions and allies amongst our midst. We have presidents and heads of state. We have distinguished leaders. We have philanthropists. And importantly, we have the corporate sector who is now interested in this thing that we've always believed is important to life on Earth, to all of our prosperities. And really, why is that? It's because nature, biodiversity, is the infrastructure of our planet. And that's why it deserves the investments that we need to make in it. You know, through the low-carbon development strategy of 2030 that Guyana has put forward, you have managed to find a way to make nature conservation and development go hand in hand and return the benefits to indigenous communities and local people, and to protect the heritage, the rich biological heritage that Guyana has. From here, as we move forward to the COP30, we need to make this part of the agenda. And it should be our mission to emphasize to the COP leadership that this needs to be part of the mission. Biodiversity must be at the table, and we need to think about how we finance biodiversity. Look, I'll close with just a simple and reflection. There are very few things that are actually true in the world. You know, truisms that you can take to the bank and you can cash it. The one thing that I know is true is that nature tomorrow will be more valuable than it is today. In 2 years, in 5 years, in 20 years, nature will be actually more valuable than today. I can't say that about anything. I can't even say that about oil and gas. In fact, if I knew that about oil and gas, I wouldn't be here. I'd be incredibly wealthy because I could make that bet. But we don't know that, but we know this about nature. And if it's going to be more valuable tomorrow than it is today, then it's an investable product. So let's not just rely on love. It's important, and we need to keep our eye on it and honor it. But let's also play on another human emotion, which is greed. And let's use that motivation to find ways to invest in nature at scale. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And Dr. Sanjayan, we look forward for your leadership in taking this to COP, but I also want to say that you have done an incredible job. You're a very quiet but forceful giant on the issue of climate and environment, and I think we need to applaud you and CI for the extraordinary work that you do. I now have the honor of inviting Senator Ross Feingold, the Honorary Ambassador, Campaign for Nature, to address us.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, President Ali. What you have done here is an example of not just national, but international true leadership. And you are demonstrating it all day today, that you are so devoted to this, and we all thank you for that. I also want to mention former President Duque, who is your strongest supporter in this regard. He started telling us about this conference months ago and urged the Campaign for Nature to come here to Guyana. Along with Brian O'Donnell, our executive director, we were thrilled to hear about it, but now we see the reality, which is even greater. And thank you so much for your enthusiasm, President Duque. My particular role as a person that works for the Campaign for Nature is to try to organize a group of former leaders in the world to make sure the issue of nature is not simply advanced by these incredible people who work on nature for their whole career, and not just scientists who are critical, but also political leaders. Because those of us with a political background know you can do all these other things, but without the political support, it won't happen. And so we've been able to recruit a voluntary group of people like former President of Ireland, Mary Robinson, people like President Duque, former President of Nigeria, Obasanjo, former Foreign Secretary of Argentina, Susana Malcorra, and others, to try to make this issue much more a public issue. And so we are so happy today that we could this week become one of the first founding organizations to join your Global Biodiversity Alliance. You'll be happy to know I have edited my brief remarks to a little bit more brief, but I do want to say this, that even with this historic agreement in Montreal, biodiversity is still far too low a political priority, which is why this summit and the engagement of heads of state and countries and leaders around the world is so critical. Because this summit is starting, we have the potential for biodiversity to be recognized by world leaders as the key global issue that we all know it is. And the centerpiece of the global biodiversity framework is, of course, the target to protect at least 30% of the world's lands and ocean. But we need to see a rapid scaling up of 1, the pace of protected area designations, 2, the improved management of areas, and 3, critically, the finance for them. To deliver the necessary level of finance, we need both public and private finance. To date, governments provide over 80% of the finance for biodiversity conservation, and so to increase the level of private finance directed to biodiversity, governments need to take a leading role, setting appropriate regulations and incentives. And a point that maybe hasn't been made today is that the scale of finance is critical, but it's also critical where the finance is directed. Currently, too much biodiversity-related finance is going to projects that don't have biodiversity as their primary purpose, but merely as a co-benefit. If we are to achieve targets like by 30, we need to make sure that the protected and conserved areas and indigenous peoples and local communities who help govern many of these areas receive direct funding. We also need to focus on long-term funding, not just a year or two and then we're gone. Too often decisions regarding public funding and private funding are made in isolation from each other, and funding has been provided in short-term project cycles that lead to sort of a boom and bust for conservation gains in protected areas, where outcomes might improve during several years that the project is operating, and then immediately decline once the funding moves to some other projects. However, there are some very positive examples in the world. In particular, Germany's Legacy Landscapes Fund is a great example of governments and philanthropies working together to establish public-private partnerships to deliver long-term funding to support protected and conserved areas. And we are working across the planet to encourage other countries to create similar funds to supplement the contributions of the traditional countries that might do this sort of thing. Ultimately, we know that reaching 30 by 30 and other global targets for nature will depend on consistent, ambitious engagement from world leaders. But President Ali and the country of Guyana have created through this summit an alliance is needed. Now we need to extend this level of engagement to other leaders, other countries, and activate it in other fora. As one goal for us to embrace and work towards, I'd like to see twice as many heads of state engaged in this alliance by the end of the year and see that number double again by the end of next year. We at the Campaign for Nature will do our part in trying to make sure that happens. Let me finally just say that, frankly, we've done our background research on this, and we have noticed that, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, the remarks made during the high-level segment in the UN General Assembly very rarely talk about this. Very few, and some don't even mention biodiversity and nature. That's not true here in Guyana, but it certainly is something that we have to make sure happens across the planet. It will only be when issues like biodiversity conservation and 30 by 30 are top-tier political issues that we will have the conditions to secure the finance and ambition needed to fulfill the vision that the world leaders committed to at COP15, to safeguard the natural world. Let's ensure that our work here over the next several days serves as a significant step toward that ultimate goal. Thank you, President Ali.
Thank you very much, Senator Russ Feingold. But I want to assure you that our work would intensify. Tomorrow, the founding members will meet with the presidency of COP to start the negotiations of having the outcome as part of COP30. And the Secretariat will be setting up a mechanism through which we will pursue this with President Lula to have this done. So there's the outcome of this summit would lead to an action plan that goes to 2030 and beyond. And your comments are truly honored and taken with a very positive attitude and intent. You know, when we announced it to the UN, there are many, President Duguay would tell you, who came to me and said, it's great, but would we get it done? Can we really get it done? And we have shown today that with hard work and commitment, we can get it done. And we are not about to fail on this at all. I want to invite now Dr. Christoph of the Frankfurt Zoological Society to address us. This is another organization that has really silently done tremendous work on nature, biodiversity, and climate. And we want to really acknowledge and thank you for the work that you've done.
Thank you very much, Honorary President, distinguished guests. It's an incredible honor for me to be with you in this room, putting biodiversity again where it should be, on top of the headlines and the plan for actions. I'm sure you're all getting now more or less hungry. I
assure you we are closer to lunch than 10 minutes ago.
That's great to hear. And all what we will consume over lunch will come from nature. All is linked to biodiversity. And if you recall that 3/4 of our crops is pollinated by insects, now this also shows now how we depend on nature. We humans, we are part of nature, we come from nature, we depend on nature, and we should work with nature and not against nature. When we look at the forest loss rate of last year, that was pretty shocking. It was the highest number in the last 20 years. We also recognize how stronger climate change and biodiversity loss is interlinked. When we look at floods and fires, now just recently in Texas, that was an amount of about 20 billion infrastructure destroyed. Now, the year before in Valencia, this was 30 billion. 1 year before in Germany, in Ahrtal, this was 40 billion, and hundreds of people lost their life. And that is just from the global north, where we have some figures. There were much bigger catastrophes in the global south. So we see how climate change is accelerating and how this is also linked to biodiversity loss. We heard the number before, 1 million species threatened by extinction. There's another estimate tells us that we lose every day, like today and like tomorrow, another 100 or 150 species. What we do as humans, we delete the hard drive of planet Earth, where information of millions of years is aggregated, and we don't know when we will damage the boot system and we will see a final shutdown of the genetic and biodiversity and ecosystem information on planet Earth. So we also see, and that is pretty new since a few years now, that there's a close link between the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the pandemics. We have already forgotten about COVID, but we do know that when we reduce biodiversity, the viruses and the bacteria can adapt easier to less diverse immune systems. And by that, there is an easier spillover from animals to humans. And epidemiologists have about 2,000 viruses on the pre-warning list. So the question is not whether we will get the next pandemic, but only the question is when. So we are creating, by biodiversity loss, we are creating our own pandemics. And by that we see there's a health crisis as well. So healthy people can live only on a healthy planet. And we know about the value, and that was mentioned many times today, about the value of biodiversity. I'm a German citizen, and I call from this room, from this conference room in Georgetown, Guyana, I call the German government now to stick firm to their commitment of providing 1.5 billion on biodiversity funding yearly. And that was a commitment which was given to the United Nations. So we Germans should stick to that now, and that also should provide enough to, and Senator Feingold just mentioned it, to the Legacy Landscape Fund, international finance system for perpetuity funding of protected area as the backbone of conservation. And I also call the German government to significantly support and finance the Tropical Forest Forever Partnership Fund. No? And for Guyana, I would say, Guyana, you can be safe that we, the Frankfurt Zoological Society, we have all hands on deck. We want to support you in this summit for your forests and for our whole future. And for that, we want to work very closely together, as we do in other countries in South America, in Africa, in Europe, and Southeastern Asia, where we are active. We want to work very closely together with the authorities on the ground, with the local and indigenous communities, and with our very good friends from the other conservation organizations. It is very clear that nature doesn't need our economy, but our economy needs nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christoph, for those important words of wisdom. Just some housekeeping matters too. Any organization or individual with ideas, you can please submit those ideas to the Secretariat, Pradeepa, so that it can be incorporated in the process going forward. This afternoon, after or before the event at the State House, led by former President Dugue, we will have a coordinating meeting among stakeholders and the signatories on how we frame the discussion for the presidency of COP and what we take forward to COP30, because we want this to be a full process of participation and involvement of all stakeholders. I now have the honor of inviting Mr. Gabriel Kigendria, Regional Director for South America, International Union for Conservation of Nature, and we are very, very close to lunch. Thank you.
So while I will promise I will be brief.
No, that's not an invitation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to thank the Cooperative Republic of Guyana through President Ali for the invitation to be here. I bring salutations from Dr. Gretel Aguilar, General Director of the IUCN. She hasn't been able to be with us, but she's very, very fond in terms of what is going on here and the spirit that it's building here. There's a paradox about conservation that is very interesting. In some cases, those that oppose conservation and those that have the traditional view of conservation have the idea that when you deal with biodiversity, you are dealing with the survival of a certain bird or tree. And we are not. We are not only dealing with that. We are dealing with human welfare. We are dealing with the future of humanity. And why is that? Because in the equation between nature and humans, we are the weak link. Nature has been said here has overcome 5 major extinctions and probably will overcome the 6th one that is happening or building right now. It's us, the ones that are exposed. Those that might not be able to survive a major extinction or climate change is us. So conservation needs to be seen under a human lens. And there is the need for a new conservation approach that, keeping the science robust, keeping the consideration of nature needs, also incorporates the expectations and the dreams of people. We need a conservation that is centered in what people need. And the concepts of ecosystem services and nature contributions helps on that in terms of how do we transition to this new model. And this new model is needed because we are all convinced of the need to have a green transition. But that transition doesn't come for free. It has some costs. And the cost has to be borne in a just way. We cannot allow the transition to be paid by those that have been hit by the traditional development model. Poor people, poor countries that have been the ones carrying the major burden of the traditional development model cannot be the ones carrying also with the cost of the transition to a green economy. So we need to have cooperation. We need to provide means of implementation for countries, for communities to deal with this transition in a fair way. There is also another issue. We should not forget the need to combine the interest in wild biodiversity also with an interest in domesticated biodiversity. We should also, we must not forget that we eat biodiversity, and especially in mega diverse countries. We do not only use the ecosystem services, but biodiversity directly as food, as something that has a direct work, a direct impact, a positive impact in the life of persons. And to do this, we need to engage new actors, the private sector, the local communities, the indigenous groups, which are there, but need to be much more present in terms of the planning and in terms of decision making. This traditional concept of conservation, we, the IUCN, we have to be blamed, because regarding this traditional concept, the IUCN was established in 1948, so is one of the mothers, if not the mother, of the conservation movement. So, but after almost 80 years, we have recognized that there is a need to move on, to have this new concept of conservation, which is centered in persons, which is centered in humans. Thank you very much, and we are ready to engage.
Thank you. Thank you. So we are just about lunch. What we will do now is we'll have Pradeepa reading a very special message to the conference whilst we organize all the signatories, the founding signatories, to be on stage somewhere above me, whilst Pradeepa would read this message. So we'll do that simultaneously. Then after lunch, we want everybody to return fully charged, because the Vice President, who is the architect of the LCDS, a former champion, well, a champion of the earth, and times hero of the environment, would lead our effort after lunch. Fully recharged. So whilst we get the participants up there, Pradeepa, you can take charge down here.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I see a hint of disappointment as the photograph comes up on the screen and I walk towards the podium. Next time, Dr. Elba will be here in person, and we understand before the end of the year. I'm here to deliver a message that Dr. Elba has asked me to read out to the participants at the Global Summit, the Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit here today. And it is from the founder of the Acuna Group, IE7, and it is signed by Dr. Idris Elba. Your Excellency, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from London. It is with sincere regret that I am unable to be with you in person today for this historic Global Biodiversity Alliance Summit. I have long wished to visit Guyana. Many of my dearest friends growing up were the sons and daughters of Guyanese families, and I grew up listening to vivid stories of your magnificent forests, your powerful rivers, and the deep resilience and warmth of your people. I carry those stories with me still. I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to His Excellency President Irfan Ali for the honor of addressing this summit, and more importantly, for his visionary leadership on the global stage. Your message resonates far beyond these borders. Biodiversity must not be sacrificed in the name of the development. It is, in fact, the very foundation upon which we must build a more equitable, more prosperous, and a more sustainable future. Guyana is providing that environmental stewardship and economic progress, and are not mutually exclusive. You are living proof that it is possible to protect the planet while uplifting communities. As someone committed to the same ideas in my own homeland of Sierra Leone, I am deeply inspired by the example you are setting. I look forward to visiting Guyana in the near future and to learning from all that you are building. Thank you, Dr. Idris Elba.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now about to transition to the official launch and foundational declaration of the Global Biodiversity Alliance. We will witness the signing of the founding members, and I'm going to call their names and their respective organizations or states. His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, the President of Guyana. His Excellency Mr. Louis Abinader, President of the Dominican Republic, and I thank you, sir, for your efforts to get here today. The Honorable Mia Amor Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados. Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Honorable Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. His Excellency Ivan Duque Marquez, former President of the Republic of Colombia. Dr. Sanjay Sanjayan, Chief Executive Officer of Conservation International. Dr. Alexander Killion, Managing Director for the Center for Biodiversity and Global Change, Yale University. Dr. Christoph Schenk, Executive Director of Frankfurt Zoological Society. Dr. Erin Hagan, Senior Director of the Keller Science Action Center, Chicago Field Museum. Brian O'Donnell, Director of the Campaign for Nature. Derek John, Chairperson of the National Tushaus Council, Guyana. Leroy Ignacio, Makushi Conservation Leader of the South Rupununi Conservation Society, Guyana. There are three more, sorry. From Ecuador, the Honorable Maria Jose Pinto, the Vice President of the Republic of Ecuador. Mr. Mauricio Velasquez, Principal Executive for Ecosystems and Biodiversity of the Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF. And Mr. James Cooper, of the Global Private Sector Group, Sylvania. What we're about to witness is what is referred to now as the Georgetown Declaration, the Global Biodiversity Alliance, being signed now. As heads of state, ministers of government, representatives of multilateral organizations, the private sector, indigenous peoples, local communities, academia, and the scientific community, civil society organization, and think tanks gathered here in Georgetown. Their signatures being appended to this declaration recognizes that biodiversity is fundamental to human well-being, climate stability and resilience, food and water security, public health, and the long-term sustainability of ecosystems, and that the accelerated loss of biodiversity exacerbated by climate change and unsustainable practices necessitates a more urgent, coordinated, transformative, and ambitious global response grounded in science. The signatories recognize that through the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, where 196 parties have committed through the CONMIG Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and placing nature on a path to recovery by 2030, achieving a world living in harmony by nature by 2050. The signatures affirm their commitment of the respective organizations and countries to advance efforts in support of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Through the Global Biodiversity Alliance, they aim to raise global awareness of the biodiversity crisis and its interlinkages with other global challenges, such as climate change, to increase ambition at every scale to address global biodiversity loss, and to increase access to and availability of financing through a menu of options to address the biodiversity crisis. It is a collective effort that as signatories, they understand and highlight the importance and relevance of each participating sector to the success of this common agenda. The declaration is non-binding and reflects a shared will to build a common working agenda that shall be shaped jointly and inclusively. From Georgetown, this declaration marks the launch of a shared and evolving framework that is open, voluntary, and inclusive. It is intended to unite, elevate, and amplify the efforts and impact of all those working for a healthier, more just, and more resilient planet. They are united for biodiversity, united for life. Heartiest congratulations and thank you very much for the peoples of the globe. As the signatories return to their seats, I wish to recognize the presence of our Prime Minister, the Honorable Brigadier Retired Mark Phillips, and we invite you all to lunch, but the signatories, there will be a family photo, and Pradeepa will direct you to the position in the foyer where that photograph will be taken. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly remain in your seats as the VVIPs, or heads of state and organizations, depart the room to go to have the family photo. And I'm sure you would want to join me once more in giving them a round of applause for this very momentous occasion. Ladies and gentlemen, as we see the signatories depart the dome for the family photo, may I remind and inform those of us remaining that lunch is available in the main tent in the compound that is toward, perhaps I'd say the back, of this facility. Lunch is served a bit late, but it shall be warm and it shall be enriching. Please indulge yourselves. Thank you once again on behalf of the organizing team, and I look forward to your return for the continuing proceedings of this important summit. Thank you very much.